Bryan Johnson just posted on his Twitter account that the New York Times is planning a hit piece against him, and the allegations seem pretty spicy. Not only are they talking about prostitution in the Blueprint offices, he also makes his employees sign a contract where they have to be okay with him walking around the office naked and partake in inspired conversations with him about Twilight-themed erotica and 50 Shades of Grey style erotica. Talk about his measured erections and the volume of his semen production, and a lot of other things that seem maybe a little bit shocking. I want to talk about his response before the article even comes out, because as the time that I'm recording this, the New York Times has not posted it yet. But before I get into his exact tweets, I want to say that I have incredibly mixed feelings about Johnson. And he's a guy who I've been watching from the sidelines for years, trying to decide whether I think he's a genius astronaut pushing the boundaries of human health and biohacking in ways that might be crazy, but perhaps provide interesting data. Or maybe he's like a messianic charlatan who's trying to capitalize on his wellness vampire image just to make money off of you. I think he's pretty funny, and he attempts, or at least he portrays himself as being really, really transparent about his successes and his failures. There's also something about his Don't Die movement, which is unlike any other biohacker out there, which is that it's not just about saving yourself and making yourself literally become an immortal rich person, but also saving the planet. If you look at the 4 most important precepts of his Don't Die movement, as he calls it, it's he doesn't want you to die individually. He doesn't want people to kill each other. Don't destroy the planet, and align with I to not die. All of those things are reasonably appealing, right? Like, no one wants to die, and killing each other is bad. There's something baked into his message of immortality which actually talks about a broader principle of human harmony and a vision for what the future could look like, which is frankly, on its face, admirable. It even provides a concept of how humans can interact together with AI instead of just fearing it. There's an implicit assumption that if you're not going to kill each other and you're going to not destroy the planet, that there has to be good governance in the world. So, altogether, on the face of it, I really like Johnson. I really like him. I watched his documentary the other day. And I also want to say that the New York Times was once one of the most important journalism institutions in the world. It was the paper of record. And at one point, I even aspired to write in its pages. I've spoken with the editors. I've worked with them nominally in the past. But the paper has gone in a very steep decline. I actually don't really respect the journalism at the Times all that much. I don't even really go to it on a daily basis. I've switched my news sources entirely, and I don't 100% trust them. In fact, I have a video on my back channel where I talked about how when I first contracted for my very first story with the New York Times Magazine, that they urged me to lie to essentially protect the pharmaceutical industry. And well, that it put my career in a very, very tight spot when I outright refused to do so. So coming into this, I have very complex feelings about Bryan Johnson and what this story might include. And maybe the reason why I'm doing this video is because there is a political moment that we live in where we have a conflict between influencers who are trying to be there, promote themselves as authentic people on the internet, and journalists who pretty much no one in the world trusts anymore because they think that we're hopelessly biased. And this interaction between Johnson and this New York Times journalist is telling about how we as humans address information and think about what truth is. Oh my God. Okay, Future Scott here. I forgot. I'm in the middle of the edit and we're deep into this whole Bryan Johnson thing, and I realized that I forgot to tell you 2 things. The like and subscribe bit. Like and subscribe down below, and also I have this Substack newsletter which supports the actual journalism that I do, and I'd love you to go check it out. That's it. Okay, we're going right into the video. Now, the author who's working on the story for the New York Times, I'm told, is a woman named Kristen Grind, and she is like a Pulitzer Prize finalist journalist. She seems like a really good person. She's written a couple of books, interviewed and written about Elon Musk. She's actually a pretty legitimate journalist, but I've had no individual interactions with her whatsoever. Okay, so let's look at the actual tweets, what Bryan Johnson said about what is coming down the pipeline about him, and I'm gonna respond along the way. Okay, his first tweet was, "The New York Times is preparing to publish a hit piece on me. I found out this story is running because a reporter from the New York Times, and that would be Kristen Grind, emailed me and my colleagues her fact-checking questions. This is standard practice before publishing a story," which is, yeah, it's true. When you are a reporter, one of your jobs is to fact-check and approach your sources to be sure that you present all sides of the stories. It's actually a really important thing to do if you want to defend yourself from like a libel allegations or defamation allegations down the road. And then he quotes Grind, "I'm working on a story about Bryan Johnson and his weaponization of non-disclosure agreements over the years to cover a range of bad behavior." And then he says, "This journalist is trying to construct a narrative about me. Let's take a look at what she's trying to do." Now, okay, right off the bat, yes, the journalist is trying to construct a narrative about you, which is exactly what a story is. In fact, Bryan Johnson is also constructing a narrative about himself. And when you write a story, it is literally a story, even if you're based on facts. Like, it is a narrative. So he's right about that, but he's sort of saying that constructing a narrative is in and of itself bad, even though I'm sure that he has his own narrative about how he talks about himself. Okay, the second tweet, which he labels Step Zero Motive. "Why is the New York Times coming after me? It's a clash of self-serving narratives. The New York Times wants a sensational story because clicks equal money." To some degree, that is true. Clicks do equal money. No one on the internet it puts content out because they don't want someone to see it. And having a business plan is, we live in a capitalist society. So yeah, clicks equal money. The journalist wants to, quote, "take down another target." Okay, so he's saying that Kristen Grind wants to take down another target. I'm just going to look at the most recent stories that she's published. The headlines are, "Elon Musk business empire scores benefits under the Trump shakeup," which I guess is saying that Elon Musk is making money off of his closeness to Trump. Okay, that seems right. "Elon Musk and his allies storm into Washington to replace it. Men and women swirling around Elon Musk." All of her New York Times stories are about Elon Musk. Okay, so none of them seem like takedowns. They all seem like reporting. Now, in terms of taking down people, she also wrote a book about Tony Hsieh, the founder of Zappos, who died by, I think, asphyxiation by locking himself in a room and burning candles in order to biohack himself into better places. So maybe that was a takedown, but the guy was already dead. That was her book. It was called Happy at Any Cost. Okay, but okay, let's go on. Maybe the takedown journalist thing is accurate. "My ex is chasing clout by recycling allegations that have already been made and rejected in 2 legal forums." Okay, so now he's bringing up his ex-wife, and indeed, there is a huge, long court drama that started in 2021 between Bryan Johnson and his ex. Bryan Johnson has indeed won those cases, and we're going to get into that a little bit later because he talks about it again down below. Okay, his fourth point is, "Don't die is growing fast, threatening the status quo power that makes me a target." Okay, I mean, yeah, you're going to report about powerful people who people are talking about because you're a public figure. Yes, but threatening the status quo power, I'm a journalist. Kristen Grind is a journalist. And I am not paid by big, powerful people who want to protect themselves and send us out as minions to do their bidding. That's a weird narrative that I guess people do repeat a lot on the internet, right? Maybe we're all funded by George Soros, but it doesn't track for me as a reporter in my experience. And he goes on to say, "I'm fortunate that I have social reach, but what is really unfair is when this happens to people who have limited recourse. This isn't just about me. This is about how the media manufactures reality. If a journalist is going to try and construct a narrative about any one of us, we should evaluate the foundation it's built on." So all of a sudden, this guy is a patriot. He is a free speech warrior. He's defending you against the media. But let us recognize that Bryan Johnson sold his company to essentially Venmo for $800 million. He is not the everyman. And I don't think he's going out defending the poor people who have been defamed by the media. He is a rich guy defending his own reputation. And that is also a narrative that is valuable for him to protect. Okay, so here's his next tweet. Step 1, and he's talking about her narrative that she's constructing. Establish the pretext for a smear. For 5 years, my ex has been trying to extract money from me, and one of her principal tools has been a series of false allegations. All of her attempts have failed. 2 separate legal forums ruled against her. The arbitrator wrote that her own evidence contradicted her own story. The district judge not only rejected her claims, she sanctioned and fined her attorneys for their, quote, serious allegations that were factually and legally baseless and frivolous. She was ordered to pay me, Bryan Johnson, $500,000. And yet, here we are. A New York Times reporter is reviving accusations that were twice rejected by 2 legal forums, repackaging them for clicks. The journalist knows it's easier to manipulate public opinion. This is how the media operates. If they can't get you legally, they try to get you socially. They don't need truth, they need narrative. Okay, well, it is true. He did win his court case, and I want to talk about that a little bit. I have not read the entire 1,000 pages of legal documents associated with the Bryan Johnson case, where his ex-girlfriend, sort of a social media star named Taryn Southern, sued him after he broke up with her when she had stage 3 breast cancer. But what I can say is that there is a person on Twitter who has read all of it, and they go by the handle Tracing Woodgrains. They have a Substack, and their tweet is fascinating. I'm going to link to it down in the description. But basically what this person has said is that after reading all of it, he was initially a supporter of Bryan Johnson, but after going through all of the allegations, he made 2 points. Basically, that everything that Bryan Johnson did in his breakup with his ex-fiancée was legal. And I'm going to quote this section. Bryan Johnson did indeed win in court against his ex-fiancée after kicking her out of their house while she was in chemotherapy for stage 3 breast cancer. He did nothing illegal by convincing her to have her salary and work for him while they were dating. It was all perfectly within the letter of the law when he tried and failed to get her to sign a cohabitation agreement saying that she could say nothing negative about him without facing severe penalties. There was nothing against the law in sleeping around while promising her that he'd be monogamous. And if her allegation that he brought a prostitute into their bed while she was there one night is accurate, well, that's not illegal either. Basically, what Tracing Woodgrains is saying is that, look, the lawsuit was indeed won by Johnson because he is technically correct on the letter of the law, but his actions are freaking shady, and character matters. And maybe when thinking about a person's character and whether or not you should work with them and put your trust in them, evaluating the things that they do and the type of person they are is important, which is why I would say that journalism actually plays an important role in society at large. But the question is this journalist a neutral party? Okay, let's go on. Step 2, framing the narrative with loaded questions. This is his next tweet. Fact-checking is simple. Verify information before publishing. Make sure it's true. Provide context and correct mistakes if they happen. Agreed. This is spot on. This is what I do on my channel. This is what every journalist should do to be ethical. Be sure that you got your facts right. Make sure that it's true and you provide context. Yeah, all of that stuff. That is what we do as journalists if we're doing it right. He goes on. Journalists are ethically bound to fairness, objectivity, and honesty. No twisting facts to fit a narrative, no cherry-picking details to mislead. Legally, they're not supposed to publish false claims that damage someone's reputation because that is defamation. Okay, here, Bryan Johnson. This is not accurate. Journalists are ethically bound to fairness, that's right. But objectivity? Objectivity is crazy. Like, journalists are not objective. There's no way in this world that you should think that anyone writing any story anywhere on the planet is truly objective. We are not instruments. We are not automatons. We take in information because we have past histories and we evaluate the information that we get through our own perspectives. There is a narrative out there that journalists are supposed to be objective, as if objectivity is even possible. It was promoted by Columbia Journalism School starting in, I guess, the 50s and pushing it on, till now. But it is patently false. We need to stop thinking that journalists are effective. What they do need to be, however, is fair. They need to honestly look at the information and present it to the best of their ability. Objectivity is bullshit. No twisting the facts to fit a narrative. What are facts without a narrative? Like, facts are the objective things that happen, like the police blotter. Someone knocked on a door, they walked through the door, they opened up the refrigerator, they drank a bunch of supplements. Those are facts, but to talk about what those facts mean, that is a narrative. You always use facts to support a narrative. No cherry-picking details to mislead. Agreed on the mislead part, you're not supposed to mislead people, but the very fact of writing, the very fact of editing, the very fact of putting a story together is to tell you what's important up top in the headline and distill it and synthesize that information for you. He goes on. When done right, journalism informs. When done wrong, it misleads. The past few years have revealed the mainstream media has misled. I don't believe this reporter is being ethical. The story hasn't been published, and when it is, you can decide. And agreed. We're going to have to read it. I haven't read it. This could be a, quote, hit piece. But when we talk about misleading, who has incentives here? Bryan Johnson has an $800 million empire. He spends $2 million a year on his supplement protocols. He sells an olive oil called snake oil. He sells a supplement called Blueprint that is supposed to achieve that goal of don't dying. His narrative is there. That is his narrative. Is that a misleading narrative as well? I mean, I think that there's good reason to think that maybe his protocols don't work quite the way he says. And perhaps if his behavior is not totally forthright to his employees, well, we should know about that. Okay, now we get to the next tweet. This is going to get juicy. I'm interested in your use of the opt-in agreement at Blueprint. This agreement, which I've seen a copy of, makes employees attest that they are okay with a wide range of unusual workplace behavior and that they don't find it abusive or unprofessional. Some people we have spoken to said that they feel coerced into signing it because they might lose their jobs if they don't. And outside lawyers we have spoken to described it as unorthodox. Can you explain why you have used this document for your employees? This is a pretty good question. I've actually, after I read these tweets, I did reach out to several employees, and I have a copy of that non-disclosure agreement flashing on screen right now. And indeed, it is pretty darned unorthodox. Okay, here was his answer to that question. I post nudes on social media. I track my nighttime erections. My team openly discusses my semen health. We make dank memes. Rather than letting people walk in blind, we disclose this up front in writing so there are no surprises. This isn't coercion, it's transparency. This practice is fair to all concerned, and it is in everyone's best interest. If someone doesn't align with our culture, they are free to work elsewhere. No one is forced to sign anything. The opt-in agreement exists to ensure that people understand and consent to the environment, and it eliminates ambiguity and prevents misunderstanding. And you know what? I like his response here. I like his response because he has a certain culture in his workplace, and he wants to be sure that if he's going to be producing the content, people aren't just like slamming him for being a really bad guy. Why not be upfront? Why not be transparent? Okay, he's added a reader's note here, and I guess that's his note. I don't know who the reader is, but maybe he's the reader. Okay, here we go. Here, the reporter's question was designed to frame Blueprint's workplace culture as inappropriate, coercive, and legally questionable, while appearing neutral. She used loaded language as, quote, unusual behavior, abusive, and unprofessional to plant the idea that something is wrong, even without evidence. By citing anonymous employees who felt coerced and, quote, outside lawyers calling it, quote, unorthodox, she implied ethical and legal concerns without providing concrete proof. This tactic relies on suggestion rather than fact, subtly encouraging readers to view Blueprint's transparency agreement as problematic rather than a straightforward disclosure of workplace culture. This is actually really just wrong. It is appropriate for a journalist to talk about what sources they talk to. The proof is that they talked to these people and those sources said they felt coerced. Consulting outside legal counsel is appropriate for a journalist to do. And then conveying that information to Bryan Johnson is an act of transparency. So the reporter did like literally nothing wrong here. They're playing by the book, by the ethical standards. And I completely agree with how the New York Times framed this question. And I also really liked Bryan Johnson's initial response. But let's get to the question at the beginning of this, which is, was this unusual behavior abusive and unprofessional? Below the tweet, he gave an image of the opt-in agreement regarding Continuance LLC, which is his company. And it showed that the agreement was trying to be transparent. But he cut it off before section 1, which they actually talked about what people were opting out from. I'm going to read to you right now. I hereby voluntarily agree to perform work for continuance, which may, depending on my employment position, involve the following: nude photo shoots of Bryan Johnson and others on the Blueprint protocol, working in Bryan's personal home, researching, discussing, documenting health issues across various measures, including but not limited to diet, exercise, heart health, erection measurements, i.e. the duration, fertility, and brain health, researching, discussing, and documenting penile rejuvenation, including visiting websites and reading articles on this topic that may include graphic photos and or graphic language. The opportunity, but not the obligation, to taste various foods, beverages, and flavoring. Note that some of these items may have smells that will permeate the workspace. Working in non-traditional workplaces that may frequently require close physical proximity with Bryan or other employees. Working in informal workspaces where Bryan may not be aware of other employees' comments or actions unless explicitly told. Routine exposure to imagery and in-person environment where Bryan, as well as others on the Blueprint protocol, wear little and sometimes no clothing, underwear. Proximity to discussions for media production, including, quote, and this one's crazy, erotica, for example, fan fiction, including but not limited to storylines and ideas informed by the Twilight series and or 50 Shades of Grey. I really want to know where that one came from. Is he is he making like 50 Shades of Grey porn? Proximity to Bryan when he is undergoing various procedures while sometimes wearing little or no clothing, frequent discussions and ideation around marketing strategies, memes, and social media that involve adult humor, jokes, ideas, phrases, and art, including topics discussed listed in this above paragraph. Discussions of sexual activities, including erections, duration times, changes in sexual abilities, for example, through aging. Discussions of physical and mental health issues, including aging, death, gut health, bodily fluids, bowel movements, cardiac, lung health, blood plasma transfusions, and routine discussions of biological processes of biological parts for medical purposes, entertainment purposes, including adult-rated entertainment, marketing objectives, ideation or humor outside communication, all together what we call the activities. Okay, so what do you think about that? I don't know. I'm of two minds. One, I actually do appreciate that there was transparency, that he is saying, cool, these are issues that you will come into contact with, and there's nothing illegal about this. And on the other hand, is this an excuse to abuse your employees? Like, if Bryan Johnson is actually trying to sexually harass his employees, would that be a violation? I think that we have sort of like a wiggle room here that ultimately depends a lot on Bryan Johnson's character. And maybe that lawsuit with his ex-wife could give you some indication of what Bryan Johnson's character would be. And maybe we need a good investigative journalist to talk about his character to really understand whether this contract is the epitome, a pillar of transparency and goodness, or an abusive legal document that allows abuse of people. And he addresses this issue in his next tweet. Question: my reporting shows that you have used confidentiality agreements extensively in your personal life and also your business. At least more than 24 people over the last 10 years. The agreements I have seen over the years have grown to be much longer and more detailed. The latest exit agreement for employees at Blueprint is 24 pages with many details related to your personal relationships and other restrictions, according to a copy that I've seen. Could you explain why you've used these agreements and what they are achieving for you? That is a pretty well-worded question. Answer: confidentiality agreements are standard and normal. I would be surprised if you didn't sign one as a condition of employment at the New York Times. On a personal level, my life is under constant scrutiny. These agreements try to create clear boundaries and expectations so that trust isn't left to chance. Over time, our agreements have evolved. Just like everything else I iterate and improve upon. The goal is precision, Clarity eliminates confusion. People know where they stand, and that's a win for everyone. Reader's note. Here the journalist is trying to imply that confidentiality agreements are suspicious when in fact they are common and normal. What do you think of that? No, seriously, tell me down in the comments what you think. My feeling is confidentiality agreements can be misused. You can, again, use them to hide abuse. On the other hand, if you want to clarify a relationship with somebody, having something in writing can be okay. But there's also a huge imbalance of power that we need to address. Bryan Johnson has $800 million that he made by selling his company to Venmo, and he has a team of lawyers that are telling people what to do. This isn't Bryan Johnson, the everyman, standing up to defend your right to free speech. This is Bryan Johnson giving you a 24-page legal document to define how you interact, not how he acts. And I think that might be a power imbalance. Are confidential agreements in and of themselves suspicious? Not necessarily, but we need to know the context. Next question. Can you explain your use of burner phones over the years and encouraging employees and others to only use the messaging app Signal, which is known for its privacy features? Answer. Since you also use Signal to ensure confidentiality of your communications, I will message you there. That's a great response. That's a great response, Bryan. Yes. Send her a message on Signal. There's nothing wrong with using Signal. But the question might be relevant to other things in the story. I don't know exactly what she's doing. Reader's note, her goal with this question is to make security measures look suspicious rather than responsible. I don't know what her goal is. You can't tell me what her goal is, reader's note, because you're not her. You don't know what she's thinking. So you can't read the subtext without understanding the text. I'm sorry, reader's note, you're wrong. But it is funny that he replied on Signal. I like that. Next one. My reporting shows that you have used the agreements to cover up business failings. For example, you told your leadership team at Blueprint last year that the company was running out of money. You have self-funded the business. I'm also aware that you have used them to hide details of your personal life. That includes the use of prostitutes and your drug use, including acid, ibogaine, DMT. Do you have any comment on that? Whoa, dude, she's got evidence of prostitution, which was mentioned in the court filing, but also mentioned by employees that I've spoken to on background. This prostitution story is certainly out there. Drug use, acid, ibogaine, DMT. Well, Bryan Johnson actually has a tattoo of 5-MeO DMT on his arm.
Yeah, 5-MeO DMT.
He has spoken about using ketamine.
I did ketamine, intramuscular ketamine, with a kernel brain interface.
It's clear that he has drug use. That's a thing that he does. Okay, let's see what he says. What's she trying to do here is state assumptions as facts. My reporting shows creating the illusion of wrongdoing. No, what she's saying is that her reporting shows this. This isn't, again, you're reading the subtext when you don't know the text. She mixes professional topics, funding, with inflammatory personal allegations, prostitutes, and drug use to imply a broader pattern of secrecy and misconduct. Yes, sure. Maybe there is a broader pattern of secrecy and misconduct. Yes, that's why we need narratives to lay the facts out to create the story that hopefully reflects reality. Maybe reality is that there's a broader pattern of secrecy and misconduct. The word broader is actually really interesting here because it means that there is a pattern, but it's bigger. This is classic guilt by association tactic designed to make any response seem like an admission. By framing the question this way, she forces a no-win scenario where denying or engaging or refusing to comment at all reinforce the narrative that she's trying to construct. In other words, she has some evidence and she wants him to respond to the evidence that looks damning, like doing a bunch of drugs and hooking up with prostitutes and kicking out his girlfriend when she had stage 3 breast cancer. That makes me look bad. You're not telling me the facts. Well, Bryan Johnson, why don't you say how you would prefer the question to be framed to address these particular facts? Maybe that's the next tweet. Okay, here we go. Twisted, right? The New York Times reporter is not investigating objectively. Again, we've already established there is no objectivity in journalism. She is constructing a narrative using loaded language, insinuation, and guilt by association to make normal business practices, NDAs, security measures, seem suspicious. Well, yes, she's constructing a narrative, but I really don't think that was loaded language. I think was a question that you're not trying to answer. She misrepresents the intent behind agreements, ignoring their practical role in creating shared clarity. Is she misrepresenting that, or is that a different assessment? Now, Bryan Johnson may feel like his agreements are one way, and somebody else may feel coerced by those same agreements. How is representing that person's feeling of coercion a misrepresentation? It's not. It's a representation of reality from not Bryan Johnson's perspective. By omitting key context, we're going back to the tweet, such as multiple legal rulings in my favor, she cherry picks details to mislead readers. This isn't good journalism. It's a pre-constructed hit piece disguised as reporting. I don't agree with that because you haven't actually read her story. It might be, but when this piece comes out, it is indeed full of slander and misrepresentations. It could be that kind of thing. But it also could be that Bryan Johnson is using his massive platform. This tweet had 129,000 views on X and millions more on Instagram. It could be that you're using your platform to slander a reporter who is trying to assess the facts in an unequal arms race. Because Bryan Johnson clearly has more power in this situation. Not only does he have more money and lawyers and legal threats, he also has a larger social media platform than this reporter, who is just going to use the New York Times' platform, which has been dwindling for years, to present her facts. I don't think on the basis of her questions you can call this a disingenuous hit piece. I just don't think so. I actually thought her questions were really well worded. Okay, next tweet. Here's the truth. Many wealthy people deal with people who use illegitimate tactics to extract money from them, and it's sad but true. I mean, yeah, sure, but many wealthy people also use the courts and threats and their power to silence people who criticize them. That's also sad but true, and frankly, a lot more common. When I publicly shared my situation in being forced to respond to personal attacks against me trying to extract money, an astonishingly high percentage of my wealthy friends reached out and confessed they've dealt with similar situations and had decided to pay up. Oh, wait, okay. My wealthy friends, the billionaires that I hang out with, have all been put upon. Well, this is so different than the beginning of this piece where he's saying he's the everyman who is just trying to defend free speech. Now he's trying to defend the wealthy. I mean, I don't know. I think his rhetoric has gotten a little off here. Human nature is what it is. I'm reading again. Bad behavior is to be expected. This is why retailers built theft into their bottom line. The National Retail Federation reported an average shrink rate of theft, fraud, and errors of 1.6% of total sales. Retailers in 22. Wait, what? What is he talking about? It's also estimated that only 1 in 44 cases of financial abuse is reported, suggesting the actual number of incidents is significantly higher. Money is important to people, and understandably, people are attracted to it. We all know this to be true. Wait, what the is he saying here? He's talking about theft at stores as if this has something at all to do with this reporter. I don't know. I think it does feel like maybe he had like a brain fart and he started writing a tweet on a different topic entirely. I don't know. That was weird. Next tweet. Once allegations are made, it's very hard to defend one's reputation. This is why many wealthy individuals choose to settle, not as admission of guilt, but because their accuser agrees to keep false claims private in exchange for payment. Wait, is he saying here that the New York Times asked him for a bribe to kill the story before it comes out? That seems crazy. Like, I don't know, but maybe that's a good business model. Bryan Johnson, do you want me to take this video down? I'll do it for, I don't know, $10 million. Whatever. No, like Bryan Johnson, if he's implying that the journalist is taking a bribe to remove the story, is giving him a cash demand, then he is defaming the New York Times and this particular reporter. And now he's saying, like, why the innocent settle? It keeps the untrue allegations private. It's quicker and cheaper. Legal fees are insanely expensive and court is stressful. When false claims can be weaponized for financial gain, the truth takes a back seat to manipulation. The more this tactic is normalized, the harder it becomes to trust real accusations, real victims, and real justice. If the cost of proving innocence is too high, the guilt is no longer determined by facts, but who can endure the fight the longest? I mean, he's right that court cases are crazy, but the instigation for this tweet is that the New York Times is not pursuing truth and has actually made an explicit offer to kill a piece for catch and kill. I don't know, Bryan. I think that you're really overstepped here, and it's frankly disheartening to me as an investigative journalist for a couple of reasons. One, well, no one's ever asked me to pay me to take down one of my exposés. In fact, my exposés make me like no money. I get paid $4 for every 1,000 views, and you can look down there at the counter to see how many thousands of views I have, and it's not going to be millions of dollars. It's going to be hundreds or maybe $1,000 if I'm super lucky. When I received this is back to the tweet, when I received a 13-page letter demanding me to pay my ex $9 million within 1 week, or else I decided to fight this dark underground practice. Those 2 years of litigation were awful and worth it. Giving in to a falsehood is wrong, and I'm glad the legal system worked, rejecting her false allegations and ordering her to pay me $500,000. False allegations undermine a just and fair society. It weakens our bonds of trust and makes life worse for everyone. Is it a coincidence that a year after the court proceedings concluded, my ex posted her new and improved story on social media within hours of the New York Times sending me fact-checking questions? Sadly, it seems to me that she is using her true story of cancer to somehow justify her efforts to extract money from me. Her work title? Chief Storytelling Officer. No, I'm not joking. Okay, is it a coincidence that the New York Times reporter would have spoken to Bryan Johnson's ex-wife? No, that would be completely normal. That's what I would do if I was pursuing the story. I would reach out to all of the potential sources to try to understand the story from as many angles as possible and then talk about it. And just because Bryan Johnson won a legal case based on technicalities doesn't mean that the allegations were necessarily untrue. Again, I haven't read the whole thing, so caveat emptor here. Maybe the case has more information than not, and you should go check out the tweet that I have linked down below to understand exactly the context of that whole allegation. So let's step back and think about what is actually going on. I am super interested in this story when it finally comes out, because Bryan Johnson, to me, is like, he's a bit of an astronaut, right? Like he is trying to do something which is unique, which is a laudable goal of trying to extend human life without suffering. Yeah, he wants to reduce suffering, and I think that is great. On the other hand, he seems like he's pretty narcissistic. That there are many employees that I've reached out to are very upset with him. They have said to me on background that they are aware of these prostitution allegations, and they say that they have corroborating evidence about it. They obviously talk about drug use, and they felt uncomfortable with him. And also Bryan Johnson sort of like screws people out of equity in the company, like a good businessman, firing them right before things vest. There are things about the way Bryan Johnson does business that aren't great. It also seems, if you watch the Don't Die documentary, he comes off as like a pretty lovable and affable guy. He was like sort of a weird wellness vampire at the same time. But it also seems like he's trying to start like a cult following, and he has grown incredibly powerful in this movement. I think he's one of the more complex characters in biohacking now, and personally, I don't hate everything about how he presents himself. And I don't hate everything about how he presents himself. I do think, though, well, look, I don't understand why a guy who has $800 million has to go start selling an olive oil called snake oil and selling a supplement out to millions of people, I assume millions of people, that promises very individualized results, but to like the broad audience. If Bryan Johnson is actually as healthy as he says he is, if biomarkers mean anything, it's only because he has highly expensive and individualized services. He has all of this individualized testing and monitoring. And then he sells a product that by its very definition and very formula, as it gets spread out around the human population, cannot be individualized. So he's selling this promise of not dying in a powder form that cannot give the same results that he allegedly is getting, that he reportedly gets. There's also every possibility that the way he presents his data to the world, like I have the best biomarkers out there, he frequently calls himself the healthiest man on the planet. We only know what he reports. Like, how do we know he's telling the truth? How do we know he's not lying? How do we know that he's not presenting things in ways that are additionally favorable to him than what the reality is? And the last thing I want to just say about the Don't Die protocol and the Don't Die movement. If you think about how he presents himself as like trying to get biologically 18 and that he has successfully de-aged himself, one, that's not possible. Like, chronologically, he's 47 years old right now. And he just went to a party last night with Paris Hilton. And I just want to put this little video of him next to Paris Hilton right here. Now, Paris Hilton is 44 years old. She is just 3 years younger than Bryan Johnson. And if I look at the two of them next to each other, and I'm just going to visually assess their age, Paris Hilton has completely won the anti-aging protocol. In fact, I wrote that in the comment on the Instagram post that he posted, and she wrote back to me and said she obsesses over it. And that means I had an interaction with Paris Hilton, which I actually think is really cool. But the real takeaway here is that the secret to longevity may not be obsessing over biomarkers. It might just be being obscenely wealthy. And Paris Hilton, she looks like she's 25 to me, and good for her. And Bryan Johnson, for all he's done, he still looks like a wellness vampire. And if you want to follow the two of them and be as young as possible and long as possible, I highly suggest that you get obscenely wealthy too, because this goal, well, it might not ultimately be attainable. Not dying might not actually be real. In fact, maybe dying, as I wrote in my book, The Wedge, maybe dying is an important part of being alive in the first place. Maybe the value of life is knowing that it can end and that it will end. And so you have to use your time right now preciously as much as possible. I'd love to know what you think down in the comments. This was my assessment of these tweets and of Bryan Johnson to date. From Pokey Bear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates. Thank you so much to all of my supporters on Patreon and on Substack who make this work possible. If you want early access and to get your name on the honor roll, please check out those links down below. And, it just means the world to me that you're here. From Pokey Bear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.